Welcome to class. The drunk professor is back. And this time, we have an elite doctor professor from California, well funded by the California taxpayer. And he is as racist as you can get. Listen into this one.
I have with me today Dr. Gabriel Selassie.
That's correct.
Amazing. He is an associate professor of history, religion, and African American studies at Los Angeles City.
I know people like this. I guarantee you, he forces each of his students to call him doctor in every interaction, including in emails and even messages. So let's just call him the good doctor. Let's see how much African American history, or for that matter, American history, does the good doctor really know?
I teach a course in African politics, African American history, and what I teach them, I'm looking at teaching them about how power works.
So right off the bat, here's a guy who teaches basically Marxism. Everything is power. All you got to do is find the source of it. He just cloaks it under classes of so-called history, politics, call it whatever you want.
Give me an example of that.
So how do African Americans find themselves in the condition that they are in America, right? So if we look at all the major indices, right, whether it's health, wealth, et cetera, we have to ask ourselves, right, how did African Americans find themselves in this particular position?
So you don't even need to take a course with this guy. All you got to do is see where he's going with this. In a sense, people have all kinds of problems, and it's never their fault. It's because they don't have power. Well, let's find the person with power who's doing well and blame them for it. That's the entire course. That's a semester. That's a degree. That's his degree.
And you say?
So we look at systems of power to sort of pull all of this stuff out.
And so how did most, not all, but most Black Americans end up in such a negative condition?
Well, I think without generalizing, we can say that sure, racism was an integral factor in the condition of African Americans, and we can also say that it's probably largely due to slave culture, right?
You'll see with people like this, all they're doing is trying to find someone to blame or something in history.
What is racism?
Well, I think if we were to define it broadly, some people would say that racism is discrimination, prejudice against a certain group of people based on their skin color, but I would argue that that's probably a muted definition, that we would have to add systems of power in that definition, because I can dislike someone just because they have a size 13 shoe, that we may call prejudice, but as long as I don't do anything to you, there's probably really no harm in that. But if I'm able to keep you from having a job because you have a size 13 shoe, that's probably, right, would be, if we were to extend this to race, that would be racial.
Not allowing a short person to play in the NBA constitutes racism. If you can't guess already, this is an intellectual heavyweight. Whew.
Yeah, there is a power dynamic that has prevented African Americans from achieving the same level of success as, say, whites. And I'll give an example. So if we were to add up the median income of African Americans in the United States, broadly speaking, it would come out to about $3,000 per family. If we were to do that for whites, the amount would be about $100,000 per family. So then how would you then account for the disparity in the amount of financial acumen or resources that a white family has versus a Black family?
Notice how he speaks like there are only two races in America. There's only white and Black. What about this group?
Not Hispanics.
And this one? No, not this one. This one.
I love Kung Fu!
How about Chinese? Chinese?
And this one.
それで負けた方がランチタイムを後にずらすからな。そうすりゃ一緒に飯食わなくても済む。
I guess none of them exist.
Who's stopping Black people from achieving those things?
Well, if we were to look at this from a historical standpoint, there have been a number of significant studies that have drawn this out. For example, Kenneth Hamilton's study on white wealth, Black repression, where he clearly outlined how in one particular Texas town, after the Civil War, whites moved physically and through laws to prevent Black people from gaining resources.
Well, the good doctor conveniently picks races because he conveniently also needs to pick his facts. The reality is the Chinese Americans who helped build the railroads were also thrown out and stopped from acquiring resources. So were the Japanese. So was every other race that came to this country. But when you look at the median income of Asian Americans today, they're at the top despite all these. And therefore, the best thing to do for the good doctor is to ignore the presence of these races, because then he can continue to blame white Americans.
America is designed in a way that prevents a lot of African Americans from achieving the same kind of advancement that the white community has.
Who designed it that way, and who's stopping them today?
Oh, whites designed it that
Who's
way.
stopping them
Let's not
today?
get it twisted. Whites have designed the system.
Hispanics, the Tejanos, also own slaves. It's an inconvenient truth.
Some inherent problems within the African American community, and not all of them can be attributed to certainly to the white community, but a great number of them can be.
Yeah, it's the old, we are to blame, but you're to blame more. So it's still your fault.
That if that happened, that it happened that way, because when people are not supposed to take care of you, you're supposed to take care of yourself. And I happen to know that in the good old days when boys were boys and men were men, if somebody refused to give you something, you go out and get it yourself. It brought out the best in black people.
Jesse here is talking about is called personal responsibility.
Yeah, sure.
And because I grew up on a plantation in Alabama under the Jim Crow laws, and because blacks didn't rely on the whites or begging someone for something, they had family, they had worked hard, they created their own, they were doing quite well. It wasn't until they started begging and blaming.
Yeah, but you
Those who blame others never get ahead. Those who take responsibility for their own actions and focus on improving themselves, no matter the circumstances around them, they're the ones who make it.
But I know that you're not trying to suggest that life for African Americans was some type of a utopia in 1870.
Well, I don't know about
Life for most black people was a living hell.
I don't know about 1870, but I know about from 1949 to this day, it's been paradise for blacks. But they're so angry and demoralized, they don't realize it.
He speaks the truth. Life is pretty good for African Americans, for Hispanics, for Asians, for white Americans. It's actually pretty good for all Americans. Nobody had it easy back in the 1800s. Not white Americans either. Many of them were indentured slaves, working in servitude. Of course, these are all inconvenient facts that this historian doctor has clearly not looked at.
Okay.
You know, black people didn't have 70% of their babies out of wedlock, and they loved what was right and did the right thing. Got married, set a good example, taught their kids how to work and be responsible, treat people the way that they would like to be treated. Would they still be whimpering and whining and begging and blaming about 1800s?
I don't know.
Today?
What Jesse Lee Peterson is talking about is a reality that most immigrant group and most new immigrant group, like Asian Americans, for instance, have been espousing.
So that what I would argue is I think that there is an argument within the black community that there is a debt that is owed to black people.
Why is there not a debt owed to Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, Hispanic Americans, the white Americans who were held in servitude? This is total nonsense.
And I was growing up under the Jim Crow laws. Blacks did better then because they believed in God. They got married. They had, they took care of their families. The parents and grandparents were around. They did much better then. They bought land. They created their own schools. They came back as professionals. They were doing better, and they were not blaming anything on white people. They were not blaming anything on white people.
Jesse Lee Peterson speaks the truth. It's an inconvenient truth that the good doctor has never looked at, because as far as he's concerned, his study of history, quote unquote, begins in the civil rights movement and after. But when you really look at the historical data, the culture of African Americans changed after the civil rights movement. And it changed for the worse, not the better.
Before we had desegregation, full-blown desegregation, there were a lot more black doctors, there were more black engineers, more black lawyers. I think there were a lot more black professionals.
So here the good doctor concedes.
Because they were taught to treat everybody the same.
Well, I think black communities were more unified, I think, to some degree.
No, they weren't unified.
I would argue so.
If you were a bad black person, you can't hang out with other black. I
Well,
remember
I
so
don't-
many
I don't
times
know.
when if the parents are bad, my parents say you can't hang out with those kids. The parents are no good, so the kids are no good too. And they were black.
You see this exact same thing in every culture where families are intact and where the family values are very strong. Strong family values result in strong kids, in successful children, whether that be in the Asian American community, the white American community, the African American community, or the Hispanic American community, or for that matter, any community anywhere in the world. That's a fact, and the data on this is very clear.
Old school, right, from
That's
Texas.
right.
So
So why can't you guys go back to teaching that rather than all this phony racism stuff?
I guess you had to ask him that. Why are you teaching phony racism?
believe that racism actually does
It
exist.
doesn't. Do you discriminate?
Yeah, I think I do.
Are you a racist?
No, I have no power.
So you don't have power.
No.
But you discriminate.
Yes,
And it's
of
not
course.
racist.
No, because I have no power to discriminate.
So you
against
saying
anyone.
white people who don't have power but they discriminate, they're not racist.
That's correct.
Amazing. How did you come up with that?
Let me get it straight. You can discriminate all you want, but it's not racism because you don't have power. Same action changes meaning based on how much authority you think you have. Morality is dictated not by what you do, but whether or not you have a corner office when you do it. That's brilliant logic, Doc. If you enjoyed watching me break down this intellectual circus, do me a favor. Hit subscribe, drop a comment telling me how much power I need before I can start saying ridiculous things too. Oh, and if you're still confused, don't worry, just keep watching. I'll keep explaining. Someone's got to do it. Subscribe to The Drunk Professor, where we take about dumbass ideas from the social sciences so you don't have to.